You know that feeling when everyone around you seems to effortlessly make friends like it's nothing, and you're standing there wondering why it feels like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube every time you attempt to connect with someone new? For years, I thought I was the only one stuck in this weird social limbo until I discovered what psychologists have been documenting about people who genuinely struggle to make new friends. Here's what makes this fascinating. According to research from the American Psychological Association, we need to distinguish between two completely different experiences that our culture constantly conflates. There's social anxiety, which is that overwhelming fear of being judged or rejected in social situations. And then there's social skill deficit, which is something else entirely. You can be terrified of social interactions, but actually be quite charming when you push through, or you can feel totally comfortable in groups, but still somehow miss all the unspoken social cues that turn acquaintances into actual friends. Anyway, the difference isn't about how outgoing you are, it's about whether you've learned the invisible rulebook that nobody bothers to teach explicitly. Think about that person you know who walks into a room and within 20 minutes has inside jokes with 3 new people versus someone else who's been in the same office for 2 years and still hasn't been invited to lunch. The social skills inventory measures this with questions like, I find it easy to start conversations with strangers, or I can tell when I've said something awkward. And what researchers found is that people can give completely opposite answers while having similar levels of desire for friendship. What we're really measuring isn't desire. We're actually measuring the ability to read social scripts, initiate connection, and navigate the weird dance of turning strangers into friends. Here's where it gets psychologically interesting and, honestly a bit uncomfortable. Look, people who struggle making new friends aren't socially broken or anything. They're just missing pieces of a puzzle that other people seem to download automatically. If you look at developmental psychology research, the folks who find friendship difficult often experienced something specific in childhood. Maybe they moved around a lot and never learned how to quickly establish trust. Maybe they were bullied and developed hypervigilance around social threat. Maybe they just never got enough practice in unstructured social situations where you learn by trial and error. These people aren't defective in any way. They just have a learning gap in an area that most people don't even realize needs to be learned. Honestly, I spent most of my 20s convinced there was some secret friendship manual everyone got except me. Like, why couldn't I be that person who effortlessly turns coffee shop small talk into genuine connection? But here's the thing, the actual science says people who struggle with this aren't lacking in empathy or likability. They're often overthinking every single social interaction to the point of paralysis. Psychologists call it metacognitive awareness. Basically, being so aware of how you're coming across that you can't actually be present in the conversation. And hey, before you roll your eyes and think, wow, just stop overthinking, just hang on a sec. Studies on social development have found that people who struggle making friends are often dealing with what's called rejection sensitivity. Their brains have basically been trained to scan for any tiny sign of disinterest or judgment, which makes every social interaction feel like defusing a bomb. You know why? Because when you're constantly monitoring for rejection, you miss the actual connection happening right in front of you. It completely flips the script. Instead of listening to what someone's saying, you're analyzing whether they laughed enough at your joke, whether that pause meant they're bored, or whether you should have said something different. Quality connection becomes impossible when you're running a full diagnostic scan on every sentence. And that's not laziness or social incompetence. It's straight up survival mode in a world that feels socially unpredictable. Here's something I found particularly striking when I dove into the academic literature. According to longitudinal studies tracking thousands of adults, researchers identified people who desperately wanted friendships but consistently struggled to maintain them. They were functioning, likable people who just couldn't figure out the invisible choreography of friendship formation. What this tells us is that the human ability to make friends isn't purely instinctual. It's a learned skill set that some people never got the chance to develop properly. Now, let's talk about the timing piece because this is where the data gets compelling. There's research showing that friendship formation has what psychologists call windows of opportunity. In childhood, friendships form through proximity and repeated exposure. You become friends with kids in your class because you see them every day. In college, friendships form through shared experiences and freedom from adult responsibilities. But in adulthood, the mechanisms completely change. You need intentionality, vulnerability, and consistent follow-through. And if you didn't learn those skills during the earlier, easier windows, adult friendship formation feels impossibly hard. People who struggle making friends aren't stuck in the past. They're trying to learn a language everyone else became fluent in during childhood. And, honestly, here's something we rarely talk about but desperately need to. Struggling to make friends doesn't automatically mean you're destined for isolation, but it also doesn't mean the struggle isn't taking a genuine psychological toll. Research from Harvard's study of adult development has documented that chronic difficulty forming connections, persistent feeling of being on the outside looking in, affects self-esteem, mental health, and even physical well-being in ways that compound over time. Studies have linked persistent friendship struggles to increased rates of depression, anxiety, and even inflammation markers in the bloodstream. So the question isn't, why can't you just be more social? The real question is, what specific skills are missing, and how can you actually learn them without the crushing pressure of feeling fundamentally broken? Because here's what the psychological research reveals when you strip away all the cultural noise about friendship being natural and effortless. People who struggle making new friends tend to share certain patterns. They struggle with what's called social initiative, meaning they wait for others to reach out rather than being the one to suggest plans. They have difficulty with self-disclosure calibration, either sharing too much too fast or staying so guarded that no real connection can form. This doesn't mean they're hopeless. It means they're operating with outdated social programming that needs deliberate updating. If you're someone who's always felt like everyone else got a friendship instruction manual you never received, psychology actually has some important news for you. Research on adults who improved their friendship-making abilities found they didn't magically become extroverts or change their personalities. They learned specific teachable skills, things like asking follow-up questions that show genuine interest, initiating plans instead of waiting to be invited, being vulnerable in small, appropriate doses, remembering and referencing things people told them before, showing up consistently rather than disappearing when anxiety spikes. These aren't personality traits, they're behaviors that can be practiced and improved even if you're starting from zero. The trap we fall into is assuming that if friendship doesn't come naturally, you're just not meant to have friends. But research shows that's completely backwards. Friendship formation is like learning to play an instrument. Some people pick it up quickly, others need explicit instruction and lots of practice. Neither approach makes you less deserving of beautiful music. What matters, according to the research, is recognizing where your specific gaps are. Do you struggle with initiating conversation? That's a learnable skill. Do you have trouble reading social cues? There are literally therapies designed to teach that. Do you self-sabotage by assuming rejection before it happens? Cognitive behavioral therapy has protocols specifically for that pattern. Because at the end of the day, the psychology of people who struggle making new friends isn't really about being fundamentally unlikable. It's about understanding that social skills exist on a spectrum, that some people need explicit teaching for what others absorbed implicitly. And struggling doesn't mean failing. The person who has to work hard at friendship isn't less worthy of connection. The person who makes friends effortlessly isn't necessarily having deeper relationships. We're all just trying to find our way to authentic connection with different starting points and different roadmaps. And sometimes that means accepting that your journey looks different, while refusing to believe that different means impossible. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. I would genuinely appreciate your support.